Good day, people of Jesus. I hope that this little teaching clip finds you well. For those of you who are still in lockdown, I just want to encourage you to keep being persistent and keep trying to move forward, despite how difficult it might or might not be. We have spent the last few weeks looking at identity, and what I tried to make a case for there was the fact that God, when He created us with a purpose. He created us to be His image bearers and to have His likeness, to be in a relationship with Him and to be in a relationship with the world. And those two, that kind of image bearing and likeness was captured in two commands: to have dominion over the world and to be fruitful and multiply. What we also looked at was the fact that sin has ruined that, and when we sinned, we basically lost the essence of that. We marred the image of God in ourselves, and as people we came into conflict, and we also lost the relationship that we were intended to have with God. We then ended off on just looking at the various voices that seek to inform identity. Well, this is a series that kind of follows on to that, and I've titled it Metamorphosis. And a metamorphosis is a change of the form or nature of a thing or a person into a completely different one. So what we are going to unpack for the next few weeks is the idea of being changed into the Christian identity. That's kind of what we're looking at. And what I want us to understand, that as we explore this idea of metamorphosis is set in the framework of a tug of war. Remember the five different voices with which we have to grapple with, where people are trying to tell us who to think, who to be, how to think, how to act, all of those things. Well, there is this tug of war that is constantly going on, trying to pull us in this direction or in that direction. Now again, we have to begin with the fact that we were created. We were created in the image of God and to have the likeness of God. And we see this in Genesis 1 and verse 2. Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. Now, the problem is that the world is trying to pull us to a position of being molded. It is trying to mold us into its own image, and I will unpack what that means. Whereas the Christian message, and in my humble opinion, only the Christian message, is a message of being recreated. Well, what does this mean, to be molded or to be recreated? Well, to be molded, before we unpack what that means, we have to understand that the Christian message, as we've explained, is that when sin entered into Adam and Eve, and through Adam and Eve entered into humanity and into the world, the heart of man, the inward person of man, was broken and corrupted by sin. And this brokenness has been passed on from generation to generation, from person to person, through interaction and interaction. And Jesus addresses this in a parable in Matthew 15, verses 10 to 20. Now, what he says in verses 18 and 19 is particularly important. He says, "What comes out of the mouth of man proceeds from the heart, and it is what comes out of the heart that defiles a person. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander." See, the problem with the world's kind of version of identity is that they are trying to mold you into their image. But what they are not doing is they are not addressing the inward broken heart. They're not dealing with the inward being that defiles you. So they might tell you how to act, they might tell you how to behave, but they cannot fix the inward source of who you are. They do not deal with it. So they are simply trying to shove you into their mold. without dealing with your fundamental problem. So this tug of war, the world is trying to mold you into its own image. Well, the Christian message is one of being recreated because of what Jesus has done. Recreated. You see, when Jesus died on the cross for us, in essence what he did is he gave his own life, his own being, his own heart into ours to replace our hearts. In Ezekiel 36 it speaks about how God will rip out the broken heart, the stony heart, and put into us a new heart of flesh. You see, what Jesus was doing is in the cross is that he was doing several different things all at the same time, but one of them was that he was passing into our being a renewed or a recreated heart, his heart. And he says this in John 1 verse 12 and 13. He says, but to all who received Jesus, who believed in his name. Now notice that the beginning of being transformed in our Christian identity is to believe in Jesus. Well, when we believe in Jesus, he gives us the right to become children of God. We do not have to do anything else but believe and receive Jesus Christ. To believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, God in flesh. And because we believe them, we have the right to become children of God. And we are born into being children of God, not by blood, meaning through natural birth, or not by the will of the flesh, meaning through our own efforts, nor of the will of man, meaning society, but rather we are born of God. What that means is that God pours out a new life, a new heart, a new disposition into us. And from that renewed center or recreated center, we now act out. So we are not trying to force people to do something and think something and behave like somebody that they are not. What we are trying to do is we are trying to help people who are born again of God and help them grow up into the identity that is now an intrinsic part of who they are. You see, the problem is that we are so inclined to add something to this process of transformation. We're inclined to contribute something, to think that it must come out of our own efforts, that it must be something that we do. Well, let me tell you something. Don't think that you can add anything to being brought back into a relationship with God. You receive Jesus Christ. You believe in him. You believe you believe in his name, meaning you believe in who he is in the fullness of his being. You believe that he is God, manifested, incarnated into flesh. And only when we believe that and receive what his life meant, receive what his death meant, does the process of transformation happen in us. And what we have to do is we must trust only in the cross. Trust only in the cross. This series of metamorphosis is not about you trying to graft in something that is alien to you. No, the process of metamorphosis from this Christian perspective is that God begins an inner work in you. And we now have to try and direct that inner work, or channel it, or kind of try and draw it out to its logical outworkings. Let me pray for you as we draw a close to this session. Father God, we want to ask that you would help us to trust in Jesus Christ, to trust in the finished work of Jesus Christ, to understand that the process or the journey of of becoming who you wanted us to be lies in accepting Jesus for who he is. Let us not try and add to this through our own efforts. Let us not try and force other people to be molded to the standard of Christian life. Rather, let us seek to always, in ourselves and with other people, come to the cross and receive from Jesus a new nature, and then act out that new nature with thanksgiving. Thank you, Lord. Amen.